Okay, let's jump right in. We're going to try to unpack the story of an entire nation's identity, but we're going to do it by looking at just one book. A book from the 18th century that tried to define America before it even really knew what it was.
I mean, think about it. What is an American? It's a huge question, right? We're still wrestling with it today. But just imagine being there at the very beginning. How would you even start to answer that? What makes someone from this brand new, chaotic place different from everyone else?
Well, way back in 1782, before the U.S. Constitution was even a thing, a book called Letters from an American Farmer shows up, and it becomes an absolute sensation. And why? Because it gave the first bold, optimistic, and really compelling answer to that question. You could almost call it the original blueprint for the American identity. But, and here's the twist, this book is not some simple rah-rah patriotic text. As you read through it, this beautiful, shining dream of a new world starts to get dark, really dark. It slowly twists and descends into an absolute nightmare. And that journey, from the dream to the nightmare, is exactly what we're going to follow. So let's start with the good stuff, the dream. The book kicks off by painting this incredible, almost utopian picture of America. It's a place of rebirth, a land of pure opportunity. And honestly, this vision he lays out, it's the one that would help define the country for centuries. And this, right here, is the heart of it all. You've heard of the melting pot, right? Well, the idea pretty much starts here. The author's whole point is that in America, all those ancient European hatreds, English versus French, all that, they just dissolve. You show up, you work the land, and poof, you become something new. You become an American. Okay, but this is where it gets really interesting. The guy telling the story, this Farmer James, he comes off as this simple, down-to-earth guy. But the actual author, totally different. He was a French nobleman named Crevecoeur, a highly educated, world-traveling potential spy. So you have to realize, this isn't a diary. It's a very deliberate and masterfully crafted piece of literature. So his big idea is this theory of regeneration. He basically says people are like plants. You take someone who's considered, useless in the depleted soil of Europe, and you transplant them into the rich earth of America, and they flourish. Owning your own land and having a government that mostly leaves you alone, that was the secret sauce that transformed a poor nobody into a proud, independent citizen. And he literally maps this idea onto the landscape. On the coast, he says, you get your rugged, commercial types. In the middle? That's the sweet spot, the hardworking, virtuous farmer. That's his ideal American. But the frontier, to him, the frontier was terrifying. He believed that far from civilization, people didn't become noble heroes, they degenerated. They became lazy, violent, and lawless. For him, the frontier was a place of decay, not romance. All right, so just when you think you have his formula down, good soil equals good people, he throws us a total curveball. He takes us away from the mainland and out to sea, to the barren, wind-swept island of Nantucket. And this place is a total paradox. Nantucket has awful soil. By his own logic, it should be a pit of despair. But instead, he finds this wealthy, orderly, almost perfect little republic. How? Well, since they couldn't farm the land, they decided to farm the ocean. They took the incredibly violent, bloody work of whaling and somehow used it to engineer a peaceful, thriving society. It's wild. And get this, tucked away in this section is a mind-blowing detail. A typical whaling crew, he says, was nearly 40% indigenous. And these men were paid equal shares and valued as essential members of the crew. It's this incredible, almost forgotten example of racial integration based purely on skill and economic need that you just didn't see in the rest of the colonies. But then, a crack appears in this perfect facade. Crevecoeur reveals that the women of Nantucket, who ran the whole island while the men were at sea for years, had a daily custom of taking opium. A lot of them. Even the sheriff. He's kind of baffled by it, but it hints at this deep, humming anxiety just beneath the surface of this super rigid society. So what you ended up with was this completely unique system. The men are gone, so the women are the de facto rulers, managing all the businesses and money. The whole society is held together by intense social pressure. Being lazy was like the worst thing you could possibly be. Even marriage was treated more like a pragmatic business deal. It was a marvel of social engineering, for sure, but also incredibly conformist. From the cold, disciplined world of Nantucket, the book just plunges us headfirst into the heat and the horror of the American South. And it's here that the dream doesn't just crack, it completely shatters.
Our narrator, Farmer James, is walking through the woods near Charleston when he stumbles upon one of the most horrifying images in early American literature. It's a black man, alive, locked in a cage being eaten by insects and birds, left to die as a punishment. This single brutal scene just upends the entire optimistic tone of the book. The contrast he's drawing just couldn't be more stark. In the North, the ideal is that wealth comes from your own hard work. But in the South, that whole glittering society, the parties, the luxury, the fancy lawyers, it was all built directly on the stolen labor and unbelievable suffering of enslaved people. And this is his most damning critique. He argues that slavery is a poison that corrupts everything it touches. It doesn't just brutalize the enslaved person, it turns the masters into monsters. It makes them deaf to human suffering and kills their own soul. It rots the entire society from the inside out. Now, as if the moral nightmare of slavery wasn't enough, the final part of the book is about the physical collapse of the world he'd been describing. And this time, the thing doing the destroying is the chaos of the American Revolution. And this part of the book is so powerful because it reflects the author's real-life trauma. Crevecoeur tried to stay neutral in the war, and he paid a horrible price. He was harassed by both sides, thrown in jail, and when he finally got back to his farm, he found it burned down and his wife dead. His personal American dream was destroyed. And so the book ends on this note of complete despair. Farmer James, the guy who defined an American by their connection to the land, abandons his farm. He decides that the civilized world of revolutionary America is actually more savage and dangerous than the wilderness. He decides to flee and live with a Native American tribe, basically concluding that the whole American experiment was a failure. So why on earth are we still talking about a book that starts with such a beautiful dream and ends in total failure? Well, it's because in those contradictions, he might have captured the truth of the American identity better than any simple patriotic story ever could. The whole book lives in the state of tension. For every dream, there's a nightmare right there with it. The melting pot that welcomes Europeans excludes everybody else. The land of opportunity is built on slavery. The idea of a mild government gives way to a brutal civil war. The peaceful, benevolent natural world from the beginning becomes a savage battlefield by the end. And we come back to this foundational idea. Crevecoeur gave us the language to imagine a new kind of person, someone free from the burdens of the old world. And that is an incredibly powerful and enduring idea. But his own story forces us to ask one final question. In trying to write the blueprint for the American dream, did Crevecoeur accidentally reveal its fatal flaw? That maybe from the very beginning, the dream of a new world was haunted by a nightmare it could never truly escape? That's the puzzle his letters leave us with, even today.